There's a lot of hype around integrating Pattern Lab with your Drupal theme these days, particularly because Drupal's template engine is now using Twig, which is one of the template engines Pattern Lab uses. The holy grail of having a living style guide and component library is now a lot more feasible. But what about Drupal 7 sites? Twig doesn't exist in Drupal 7. Today, I'm going to show you something we're working on at ActiveLamp to implement Pattern Lab templates in Drupal 7. Hey guys, I'm Tom Friedhoff, a solutions architect here at ActiveLamp. Let me first start off by defining what I mean when I say a living style and component library. This idea can mean different things to different people. A living style guide and component library is the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript that document the design of a user interface. The living part of that means that the style guide should be constantly in sync with the actual app that implements the interface as the design improves or changes. How do you easily keep the real app and style guide in constant sync? That could be a lot of work given that once the initial designs are done, the design iterations are typically done directly in the app being built, making the style guide obsolete and outdated. That's where the promise of Pattern Lab integration with Drupal comes in. You can easily keep the style guide in sync if your app depends on the style guide for all its HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. That's why there's so much hype around building Pattern Lab themes in Drupal 8 right now. Drupal 8's theme engine is a theme engine that Pattern Lab uses, and reusing the same Twig templates that your UX designer created in Pattern Lab within Drupal is now an option. Well, we're still working on Drupal 7 sites, so how do we benefit from this approach in Drupal 7? To be honest, we're still hashing out our approach to do this in Drupal 7. We have the process built out enough, and we're using it on a new theme we're developing for a client, but we're still constantly iterating on the process and improving it as we run into things. What I want to show you guys today is the direction that we're going, and I'm hoping to get your feedback in the comments so that we can continually improve and iterate on this system. First off, we decided not to use the Twig version of Pattern Lab. We spent half a day trying to get Twig working in Drupal 7 with the Twig for Drupal 7 module and realized we'd be going down a pretty deep rabbit hole just to make Twig work in D7. Rather than fight Drupal 7 and Twig, we decided to use a much simpler template engine called Mustache. Mustache is a language agnostic template engine, and there's a really nice implementation of it in PHP. With that said, we installed the Gulp version of Pattern Lab, which uses Mustache templates in JavaScript. We now have the ability to share templates. I'm going to jump into a demo here in a second. However, I'm not going to do a deep dive of how Pattern Lab works or how Drupal and panels work. I'll dive deeper in future videos with those details if you're interested. Leave a comment if you want to see that stuff, and we'll put it on our list of content to share. I'm going to give you guys a 10,000 foot view of how things are shaping up with our Drupal 7 integration to Pattern Lab. Alright, so here we are in our Drupal 7 install. This is pretty much a vanilla Drupal installation. If I jump over to the Drupal directory, you can see here within my sites all modules file or directory. Here are all the modules that I need for this actual demo that I'm going to use for today. We like to use panels and panels everywhere, so what I'm going to be demoing today is going to be with panels and panels everywhere, but the stuff that I'm going to show does apply to just regular template files if you don't want to use panels and just want to stick with the core TPL system within Drupal. One of the other things that we have in here is a theme called Hills. This is where all the magic actually happens, and one thing that you'll notice in this Hills theme is we have two directories called Node Modules and Vendor, and we're actually pulling in dependencies from NPM and from Composer, from Packagist, into this theme. And so if we open up our package.json, which actually defines the NPM dependencies, you can see that we're defining a dependency called Hills Pattern Lab. This is basically the repo that holds our Pattern Lab instance. It's the living style guide that the UX designer uses to actually update the patterns, update CSS, and make any changes that need to be changed in the UI. The Composer.json file is requiring the Mustache PHP implementation, and we're using this library for obvious reasons to render the mustache templates that we're pulling in from Pattern Lab. And so this theme needs to be instantiated with an npm install and a composer install to get these dependencies. And once you've done that, then you're ready to start working on the theme. One other thing that I want to do before I actually start building this out in Drupal is I want to show you the Pattern Lab instance. And so I am in our Hills directory. I can run npm start, and this should pull up our Pattern Lab instance. And so here is our Pattern Lab instance. I'm not going to go into the details of what Pattern Lab is, but essentially it's all the components that make up a website. And so, for example, you can see a page header looks like that. If we wanted to see what the header of a website looks like, it looks like this. And all of these templates are basically mustache templates within our Hills Pattern Lab. And so let me open up Node Module so you can actually see these templates real quick. And so the Pattern Lab directory structure looks like this. Within the source directory inside of patterns, we can go into organisms and actually look at what a header looks like within Pattern Lab. This is including a couple other patterns from within Pattern Lab. And so let's see what the navigation actually looks like by going in here. And so this is the HTML that make up a navigation. And so this template includes other patterns within Pattern Lab. Let me drill down to the primary links pattern. And here's what our primary links look like. And you can see that this is outputting variables, for example, href and name here. And then it's including yet another pattern within Pattern Lab. Let me open that one as well. And here you can see that it's outputting more variables, classes and name. And so these variables are actually defined within Pattern Lab's data directory. I'm not going to go into detail how that works, but let me just show you what that ends up rendering. And so you can see here's our organism header. That primary links pattern is this here. This is basically rendering data from Pattern Lab's data directory. And so if I go into the data directory, just real quick, within the primary links JSON file, you can see this is the actual data that it's pulling in. So if we wanted to say staff services, this is going to rebuild, and we should see staff services here. And so that's essentially how Pattern Lab works with data. In a nutshell, what I'm going to show you guys is how we actually integrate this with Drupal. Eventually, what's going to happen is these mustache templates are going to render variables from Drupal and not the data specified in this Pattern Lab data directory. And so let's jump over to Drupal. And so here's our Drupal installation. First thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to switch the theme to our Hills theme, our Hail to the Hills theme. And so I'm going to enable this and set this as the default. Okay, and so now I'm going to open up the home page in a new tab and drag that over here. And so now we can see here's what we get out of the box with this Hail to the Hills theme. There's really nothing in this theme yet. I mean, there is stuff in the theme, but I'll get to that in a second. But this is what you'll get once you enable it initially. Now we're using panels everywhere with this theme. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go configure panels everywhere. And so panels everywhere gives you a site template by default. And so I'm going to come over here and edit it. And I'm going to add a new variant. And we'll just call this default. And I'm going to come over here and choose a layout within the PL templates layout category. And I'm going to hit full width one column, continue. And then we'll just work through this UI. And then I'm going to give it basically the basic content that we need to render so that you can actually see something on the page when you visit a page within the site. So we'll create the variant here. We'll update and save that. And so now let's look to see what our home page looks like. All right, so our home page is starting to look a little bit better. We're basically hitting the default homepage for Drupal, which just shows the title, and then no front page content has been created yet. All right, so you noticed here in this layout tab, we had this category called PL templates, and it's pulling in full width and main content. So let me show you where these are defined. If I jump back into our theme, within our theme info hook, or info file, panels allows you to specify a directory where you're going to define your layout plugins. And so the way you specify that is by using the string plugins, panels, layouts, and then you just give it a path to your directory. And so if let me close node modules so this is a little bit easier to see. If I come into this layouts directory, you can see that I have two layouts specified here. We used the full width layout, so I'm going to jump into that first. And so this isn't a tutorial on how to create plugins, but essentially what we're doing is we're just creating a CTools layout plugin. And so we've called this the full width one column. We've said the theme function or implementation for this is panels full width, and you can see that we have a panels full width template here. So when this layout is used, it's going to actually use this template. And if we jump into that, all this template is doing is it's printing out whatever is in the content area. Now this has nothing to do with Pattern Lab yet, but this is how you essentially set up a default template with regions within panels everywhere. All right, so let's jump back to Drupal and go into our content area. And so you remember, we have the default template set up now, but now let's start to pull in some of the patterns from Pattern Lab. And so if I come over here, this pattern here called organisms header, let's pull that in to Drupal first. And so I'm going to come in here and add content. I have this PL components over here, and we have a pattern called header. And so I'm going to click on that, and this header is asking for 4 pieces of data. And so I'm going to give it the data that it needs. So I'm going to browse for a file. Let's look at that. Yep, that looks good. We'll upload this, go to next. We'll say logo. And then we'll give it a path, and we'll tell it what main menu to use. So we'll just say use this as the main menu, and what help menu, we'll just tell it to use the user menu for now, and then finish. Let's drag this up to the top, hit update and save, and let's go see what happens. So let's go back to our home page. And voila, we got a header pulled from Pattern Lab in here. Now you'll notice that the menu is not the same menu that's coming from Pattern Lab. And why is that? It's because it's pulling the actual primary links from Drupal. And so if we go into the menu system here, we chose the main menu to use the main menu here. And if we create another link here, we can say another, link. Let's just have this go to front. And then we come back to our home page. You can see that this is actually pulling from Drupal. Now we have no submenus underneath that, and that's why it's not showing anything underneath it, but you can see that we're actually using our own data from within Drupal. So how did we actually pull in this whole header section from Pattern Lab? And so let's go back to where we actually pulled that in, and I'm going to go to Structure, Pages, back into our site template. And we had this content type that we pulled in, this PL header content type. This is a CTools content type, and you can define those with a content type plugin. And so because this plugin only exists within this theme, we defined the CTools content type within this theme. And the way we did that is within our info file, we're specifying where content types for CTools should live. And we're saying those content types should live in the Pattern Lab directory, which is right here. Now this behavior isn't default behavior in CTools, so we did have to patch the CTools module so that we could do this. You can check out that patch here and leave any comments if you have any comments or suggestions regarding that patch. It's a very small patch, but it basically allows us to define content types, CTools content types, within our theme and not have to define a module just for these content types. And so let's look inside of this Pattern Lab directory and see what we have. And so the way CTools plugins work is it'll traverse the directory that you've defined and look for any .inc files and read those in while it's processing plugins. And so within the organisms header directory, I have a file called organisms header inc. The content type system within CTools will pick up this file and it'll read this variable that defines the actual plugin. Now you can specify other functions to be able to expose, for example, an edit form. Here you see we have a submit handler for that edit form. But here's where all the magic happens. Here's a function that we've defined called preprocess. And this is where we actually map the Drupal data into data that Pattern Lab understands. And we pass this data to Mustache to actually render the pattern. Let me back up and show you what Pattern Lab is expecting to see within this content type. I'm going to open up a new PHP Storm directory so that I don't have to continue to scroll up. And let's just go into Sites, All, Themes, Hills, Node Modules, Hills Pattern Lab. Open a new window. Yes. Okay. All right. So here is the Hills Pattern Lab directory within that theme, that Hills theme. And so what I'm going to do is go into the pattern that we're actually pulling in. And so it is here. This pattern is pulling in data from this data file. And so the hints that you can get from this data file is basically looking at what these patterns rely on. And so we're not producing or we're not outputting any data here. So what we need to do is we need to drill down to see where data actually is being output. And so if we go into navigation, we can see navigation still isn't outputting any data. It's still just including other atoms and molecules. And so let's jump into the primary links. All right, so now primary links is starting to actually output data. We have that href file there, or href variable. We have a name variable there, but then you can also see that it's pulling in yet another include. But this is where we want to start. So we're using data here in this primary links component. Within Pattern Lab, you can specify data in this data directory. We have this primary links JSON file, and we've basically specified an object with a primary links key. Now Pattern Lab is going to read in all these data files and essentially merge the objects so that you can reference them by whatever key is at the root of that object. They all get merged into the data JSON file. And so if we look here, primary links is being looped through, and then the href and the name is being rendered out. So if we look at this, primary links is an array with name and href. And so if we collapse these guys, you can see we have name, we have several links here. So staff services, work tools, news, administrative units, contact us, that all coincides with our pattern over here, right? And then within that pattern, coming back over here to primary links, you can see that it's including molecules drop down, and that is here. And that's also rendering or looping through the links and using classes variable and the name variable. So if I come back into that data file and open one of these guys up, you can see here's the links array, and there's the name and href that is being used. And it looks like we're only specifying classes on this very last button here. And so if we come back here, you'll see that that class is actually specified there, and that's what makes that look a little bit different. So essentially what we're doing in Drupal is we're just mapping data to the data that Pattern Lab expects. And so let's jump back over to Drupal. And so now here's our Drupal content type. And so you can see here, essentially we're returning an array, navbar brand. Here's our primary links. Here's and so that's what we just looked at. The primary links is essentially creating an array that looks like this, but in Drupal. And so you can see here, Hills menu tree. This is essentially creating that array that Pattern Lab is expecting. All right, so I'll show you an easier example of what that looks like as we continue to build out this page. All right, so let's add another pattern to this site layout. And so we come into the default template and we add content, go to Pattern Lab Components. I'm going to add in a footer calling card. And so that footer calling card, if we come over here into organisms, maybe it's molecules, footer, we can see the footer calling card looks like this. And if we come into the template for that, and that's a molecule under footer, the calling card looks like this. And this takes several variables. It takes a title, phone, email, and then it loops through a social array and outputs the href and the network. And so if we look at the data that we defaulted in Pattern Lab, we can come over here to footer calling card. There we go. And so you can see that we've got a calling card key, and then we've just specified the data down there. All right, so we're going to render this in Drupal, and so we created a content type that essentially has an edit form for all of this information. And so let's just fill this out, information technology, and let's just go, sure, and yes. Let's keep that there, update and save. And so now, yay, there's our footer calling card. All right, so you guys get the idea there. We're able to create content types. We're able to create an edit field that passes in data, or that we're collecting data, and then we pass that data into Mustache and render the Pattern Lab template with the data that we are pre-processing. And so what if you're working with content that isn't going to be a CTools content type? For example, like nodes. Well, let's create some nodes and see what that actually looks like. And so I'm going to come in here into configuration, and we're going to devel generate a few nodes. All right, so I can come down here, hit generate content, and let's just create 10 basic pages. We'll generate that, and now let's go back to our home page here. So there, we have 5 nodes listed on the home page now. And so how do we actually style this so this looks like something? And so what I'm going to show is, first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to put this into a content container. And so let me go over to our Pattern Lab, and I'm going to go to Layouts and look at our main content. And so our main content goes into a container that looks like this, and the content is output inside of that container. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually create this home page as a view so we can actually control the template that's being output here. And so I'm going to come over here to Structure, go down to Views, and let's add a new view. Let's call this home page list. We'll continue and edit that, and then we're going to make this a content pane. I'm actually going to get rid of this page here. We didn't need that. I should have unchecked it. And then within that content pane, we're going to render fields, and we're not really going to be using the views output, so I'll just uncheck that, and then we'll also throw in the body here, and we're going to limit that to 600 characters. And so that's what our view is going to look like that we're going to use on the home page. Let's go ahead and save that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new front page over in Page Manager. And so within Page Manager, I'm going to add a custom page. We'll call this front page. And then we'll give this the path of front. And we're going to check this box that says make this your site homepage. We'll continue. And then I'm going to choose the layout called the main content. And what that's going to do is that's going to use the layout from Pattern Lab that uses main content. And I'll show you that here in a second. So I'll hit continue, continue, and then inside of here, we're going to output the view that we just created. And so here's that view there. So we'll save that and we'll hit finish there. Update and save. And so now we have a home page or a front page that's going to render a view called homepage list using the layout main content. So let's take a look to see what happened here. Let's go back to the home page, and there you go. You can see that we're now outputting that actual view within the page content. Now this home site install shouldn't output here, and this is actually being output by panels. So what we're going to do is we're going to disable that title there. If we come back in here into content, and then actually this is going to be in the site template. We'll edit that, go into content, and within the page content section, we're going to override the title and make it nothing. Update and save that. And so now we're getting a lot closer to what our styles look like in Pattern Lab. And so now the next step that we want to do is actually make this view look like something in Pattern Lab. And so what we're going to do is we're going to make that look like a 2-column stack view. And so we have this data here that's set up in a 2-column stack. We're going to make the data from views output this template when it renders. And so let's jump back into views. And so let's go into the front page that we just created and go into the content. And so here's that view. I'm going to open this cog here and edit this view in a new tab. And so views gives you the ability to specify a theme file. And so what we're going to do is we're actually going to specify this theme file in our theme. So I'm going to copy that and then jump into our theme over here. And so here's our Drupal theme. Go into my templates directory. Let's create a views directory so that all our views live in the same directory within our templates directory. And then let's create a file called views unformatted homepage list. And so now let's just put it in hello world so you can see that this is actually working. When we rescan the templates, views is going to pick up that template file, as you can see now that it's bolded. And we'll save this and refresh the home page, and you can see, so now it is outputting hello world, which is in our template file. So how do we actually use the template that is in Pattern Lab? Let's go back into views. And so this is where the magic happens in this theme. We have a variable exposed called M, which is basically the mustache connector to Pattern Lab. And on that connector, we have a method called render. And so this is where we're going to specify the actual template that we want to use within mustache. Now there is a naming convention to this, and we'll document what that naming convention is. But essentially what you need to do is specify what type of pattern it is. So this is an organism, so it's an organisms, and then what the name of the template is. And so this is a 2-column stack. And that's really it. That's all you have to do to render this template. So let's go ahead and save this and then look at our view here. And that didn't render anything. Let's go back to our template, and you can see that we're actually not printing anything out. So let's actually print out the results of that call, and then let's see what happens. And there you go. So now we're actually printing out the template from Pattern Lab. But you can see that this is actually pulling the data from Pattern Lab. It's pulling out its default data from Pattern Lab. So how do we actually make it output our own data? And so just like the content types that I was showing you, we can send it a map of how our data should look. And there's 2 ways we can do this. This method here, render, actually takes 2 arguments. One of them is an array, And I'm going to show you that first. And this array is the actual map that the component is expecting. And so if we look to see what the component is expecting, let me jump back over to our pattern lab and then go into the data file that the column or that the 2-column stack is expecting. We can see that it's expecting an array with a 2-column stack as a key, and then that is an array of objects with card as the key, and then title and nut graph. And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just pull some of that data out of there, and let's go back to our Drupal theme and paste that in here. Now obviously JSON syntax doesn't work in PHP, so we need to convert some of this. And so I'm going to make that an array. All right, so that looks more like what PHP can understand. And so now what I'm going to do is copy this array, but we also need a key of what it's expecting. And so what it's expecting as the key is primary links. Sorry, we're looking at the 2-card stack. What is that expecting? 2-call stack is what that's expecting. All right, so let's grab that. All right, so now this should do it. Oops. Cool, because that ends the map there. Okay, so now we have this 2-column stack. We're actually passing it data, so you can pass it whatever data you want, but essentially this is what Drupal is looking for. So if you have your data, then just go ahead and do it right here. And so let's see what this actually looks like. Let me save that and then come back over to Drupal and then hit refresh. And so you can see now it's printing out 5 cards with the same data in there. Now we have another way of actually mapping this data, and this is through a preprocess callback. And so the way that works is there's a third parameter that you can pass to this render function. And so let me delete that array that we just defined. And what we're going to do for the second parameter is we're just going to actually pass it the variables that Drupal knows about. And so inside of a Drupal theme, when you're working with your template, there's a variable exposed called variables that you can use, and then you can output whatever variables you want. What we're going to do is we're going to actually pass that to a callback that we define here, and we'll pass that in as v, just so that we don't confuse it with variables here. And so what's happening behind the scenes is this variables is being passed into this callback, and now you can run PHP logic to actually pre-process your variables. And so just to show you what variables looks like, let's Crumo that so you can see what's actually being passed into this callback. And so if we hit save there, refresh this, you can see here is what the view is actually outputting, and what we really want within this data is the results that the view is outputting. And so here's all the data that the view is outputting, and so this is what we want to actually map to what Drupal is expecting. And so if we come back into here, what we'll do is we'll return an array that Pattern Lab is expecting. That array expects to have this key, so we'll copy that. And then that key has a bunch of cards that are associated with it. And so what we're going to do is we're going to actually do the pre-process just to keep this clean in a separate function. And so I'll just define this as process card, data. And so in that in this function that we're going to define now, we'll just copy this little function guy here. This function is going to need to take the data that we're passing it. So we'll just pass in v here, and we'll pass in v here. But really, what we really need from v is just the results from the view. So maybe we just pass in v view result. And then down here, we can just say that this is going to be called the results, since it's an array of results. All right, and so now essentially what we need to do is we need to create this data format again with this function that we're using inside of Drupal. And so what we'll do is we're just going to loop through the results as result. Oops. And we're going to create what we need. And so actually we need to specify a data array up here, and then let's return the data array down here. And so what we need to do is specify each element of the data array. And so that's going to be equal to another array. And in that array, let's see what that needs to look like. That needs to have a card key with another array with title, nut graph, and href. And we're just going to leave href off since we don't have the links yet. Title, nut graph, and href. All right, so let's go back here and let's start to set up what this looks like. So it needs title. It's going to be something. Nut graph. And href. Cool. But one thing, but we also need this to be in an array with card. So let's actually create the card here. Oops. And pull this and put this inside of the card. Okay. So now this is starting to look a lot like the data that Pattern Lab is expecting. Okay, so now let's actually map the data from views. And so if we come back over here and we look at what we have each one of these objects. We have the node title, and we have the field body. And so essentially we just need to write that into the template. So node title. And then for the body, we have field body 0 rendered markup. And then for the href, we do have the NID, so I guess we can pass that here. Cool. All right, and that should be all that we need. So if we save this and then go back and refresh this, and that didn't work. All right, so let's take a look to see what we did wrong here. So I'm going to output our variables again and just make sure that we map this properly. So view result. Okay. And so we got view, view result. Oh, view is an array. It's not an object. This will probably fix it. Oops. So we have view result. View is an object. Result is an array. Object. Okay. So we're looping through the array and then an object. So, all right. So let's save this and see if that actually works. And get rid of this criminal. There we go. There is our views data within our template from Pattern Lab. So the idea is that the Drupal theme developer just needs to specify one file that renders the template from Pattern Lab while passing it the variables that Pattern Lab is expecting, or passing a callback function that our mustache connector can then call and map out the variables that Pattern Lab is expecting. So that's the direction we're going. Hopefully that gives you the idea of what we're trying to do. We don't have any HTML, CSS, or JavaScript in our theme. Any changes needed in those files get pushed upstream to the Living Style Guide, and we pull the changes back down into Drupal. There's a lot going on under the hood in this theme to make all of this work. We're thinking that this theme will end up as a base theme that you can extend to take advantage of this functionality in your own theme. However, that is still yet to be determined, and we may change our minds on that approach. If you have an opinion on that, please let us know in the comments. There are definitely some trade-offs to using this Living Style Guide approach, and those trade-offs exist regardless of the Drupal version you use. I plan to release a future video to talk about the benefits and disadvantages of the Living Style Guide approach with Drupal. Taking this approach definitely does not fit every Drupal theme. More about that later. Also, we're going to be releasing more videos as we iterate on this theme. So if you're interested in following along with us, make sure you subscribe to this channel. Thanks for watching. See you next time.